Welcome, one and all, ladies and gentlemen, to the latest episode of your favorite NFL-based podcast, sweeping the nation as we have been for the last 2 years. At some point, that fact will come true, and we'll just get a bunch of viewers every single week. But for now, we enjoy all of you that continue to join us here on a weekly basis, here at the Sports Agents of Chaos podcast. And as you can tell by the title, we're reaching for content at this point. The NFL season is truly done, and before the offseason begins, we have items to talk about, you could say, but in all actuality, we are going to have a little bit of fun this week and next episode. As of now, the last two projected episodes we are going to have covering the end of this season, going into the prelude of the offseason before we take our little break, just like we did around this time last year. And joining me, as always, my compatriots of chaos alongside myself, Iceman Jurg, at the top of the screen with me. He is our resident games master of the program. Justin, how we doing?
I'm doing well, man. How are you doing?
I'm doing pretty good. Back in NYC. I think people realize when it's a different background from the usual. I'm somewhere else. I'm back in NYC, seeing the family, watching Drive to Survive. So that has been the highlights of my trip back home so far. It's always nice to just be back home. Speaking of which, will this man return home in weeks' time? What will be his newest team for the 2024 season? The man at the bottom of the screen, the Podfather himself, Rick. Rick, how we doing?
It's so close. I'm so close to coming home. And yes, I will hire Eric Bieniemy to run my fantasy team because he doesn't have a job anywhere else right now. So run my fantasy team and we'll win a championship to go along with my Pick Challenge championship trophy, of course.
Yes. See, I didn't bring the trophy this time around, so I cannot bring that one out. But perhaps next time. But as Rick has alluded to, and as Rick continues to take advantage of the little ticker behind under the names, at some point Justin and I will add stuff there as well. We probably won't be as creative as Rick, but we'll give it a fair shot if we can. It's going to be quite a little bit of a funky episode this week to an extent. We have a little bit to talk about now that things are truly full and gone. We're finally going to talk about our long-awaited thoughts of the head coach hirings that occurred. Basically, almost all of them before the Super Bowl. Boys, I think only one of the hirings happened post-Super Bowl, if memory serves. So we've waited a little bit to talk about these, as a group together. One or two we discussed on the show because it warranted it. And the rest are like, we'll get to you eventually. So that being said, we will end the show talking about the head coach hirings. But before we get to that, we have a little bit to talk about, including news that Justin put on our radar yesterday, the NFL salary cap and the unexpected boost that it got. The cap was already projected to go up high, and it went even higher than we expected. So we'll be talking about that and what the boon it could be for teams going into this offseason. But before all that, we will get to the man as his name is in the title, because there is a retirement for us to briefly discuss, and maybe it'll be alluded to here or not. I don't know what the topic's going to be. I never know what the topic is going to be about because, as always, ladies and gentlemen, it is Rick's mind-blowing fact of the week.
So in honor of Matthew Slater, I have a mind-blowing fact. Actually, I have two that are related to the team that he played for. Not so much for him because they were outside of his purview, but they are Patriots mind-blowing facts, if you will. So the first one is that many years ago, they were known as the Boston Patriots because they played in the city of Boston. They played in Nickerson Stadium or Harvard Stadium. They played in areas that were actually, Boston-based. And there was a time they played at Fenway Park as well. In 1970, though, they decided they needed to move around. And so Boston's city council was unwilling to help them build the new stadium. So they decided to move to Schaefer Stadium, which is now Gillette Stadium in Foxborough. So this kind of gave them an idea that, let's not be the Boston Patriots because we're not in Boston anymore. And sidebar on that, how refreshing is that? Washington Commanders in Landover, Maryland, like that you're not actually bogarting the name of a city you don't belong to anymore. So they decided at the time, okay, let's change our name to something that resembles a little more of what we're about. And so they settled on the name the Bay State Patriots because Massachusetts, as we know, is the Bay State. That is the nickname. You know how New York's the Empire State, Massachusetts is the Bay State. The NFL, upon agreeing to let the Patriots into their league, however, said, listen, guys, we got a problem with this. It's easy enough for us to say, the Patriots hire somebody, but some newspaper headlines will have, Bay State abbreviated. And so what happened was when they had a press conference, to hire general manager Upton Bell, the newspaper headline that was about to come out said, BS Patriots to hire Bell. And so therefore, they changed their name rightly and smartly from Bay State Patriots to the New England Patriots. So that's fact number one. Now, fact number two deals with a little league, in a way, the XFL Houston Roughnecks. So if you recall from when the Roughnecks started, when the XFL started, they were looking at logos and trying to trademark different things. Well, the first logo that the Houston Roughnecks attempted to put forward was the old Houston Oilers derrick, the oil rig, and that obviously raised a significant red flag from those greedy, narcissistic Tennessee Titans because they own the rights to the Houston Oilers trademark, image, likeness, and all of that. So they said, okay, fine. Well, what if we change the colors a little bit? Well, so they changed the colors from like a tealish blue to a regular blue, to like a cerulean almost. So the NFL, once again, filed a trademark lawsuit against the Houston Roughnecks because those two colors, the navy blue and the red, too similar to Robert Kraft and the New England Patriots. So the Roughnecks wanted to use logos that were similar to the Oilers and that had, the oil rig, and they were banished from doing that by the Tennessee Titans and the NFL, and then they changed the colors, and the Patriots came in and said, excuse me, that those are our colors, buddy. So change your logo one more time. So once again, the NFL pushing around the Little League, that is the XFL, now the UFL. May God have mercy on our souls.
Rick, I alluded to it before, as always, by the way, outstanding facts. BS Patriots. I mean, I'm sure a lot of Jets, Dolphins, and Bills fans have been saying something in that regards, have been using that sentence to an extent for a very long time now. It's ironic that could have been the name. But, we talked about, I alluded to it, your next NFL team you're rooting for. But what about your next XFL team you're rooting for? Who are you going to be rooting for in this new league?
The St. Louis Battlehawks, of course, obviously. Look, the thing is that I still harbor very ill feelings about a certain Los Angeles sports owner named Stan Kroenke, if you will. And so I will always support a pro football team in St. Louis because if you watch the XFL before COVID killed the season in 2020, that stadium was rocking every home game for the Battlehawks. And it's such a pro franchise, renaissance story that I don't know if you saw this too. AJ McCarron requested his release from the Bengals to go back to the Battlehawks because of how much he loved being there. And to be fair, how much he plays in St. Louis because he ain't playing in Cincinnati because of Joe Burrow.
Or the NFL in general.
Well, or the NFL in general. But at the XFL, he can be the MVP. He can do whatever he wants. And he's beloved in St. Louis. And the Battlehawks logo, I think, is the coolest one. So I'm a Battlehawk stan. That's how it goes. Not Stan, but you know what I mean.
Not a Stan, but a Battlehawk stan.
No.
Very, very much understandable. And ladies and gentlemen, as it's been alluded to multiple times, good guys is what the show is all about. And Matthew Slater retired from the NFL within the last week or so. 10-time Pro Bowler, if I'm not mistaken. 8-time All-Pro total. Upon his retirement, Bill Belichick, Tom Brady, Julian Edelman, Robert Kraft, everyone's singing his praises onto him. And for a guy who, I think it was a 5th-round pick, went into the Patriots, one career catch. It's outstanding. But that one career catch, you know where he's taking that one career catch to him eventually, boys? Canton. He's going to the Hall of Fame when it's time, ladies and gentlemen. But in all seriousness, as much as we like to have gimmicks and fun with that, we can always appreciate a man who was able to make a great career for himself in the NFL, despite not being the typical all-pro, all-world Hall of Fame talent like a Megatron, a Randy Moss, or a Tom Brady. Ironically, a teammate.
Or Devin Hester, apparently.
Or Devin Hester. Hey, that's a deserved Hall of Fame right there, good sir. Yeah. So at the end of the day, congratulations to you, Matthew Slater. And I'm sure Justin, well, both of you probably, but I'm sure Justin, before he gets to his trivia here, has a story where Matthew Slater somehow cost the Jets a game on special teams. So give it to us, Justin. How did Matthew Slater cause you pain one time?
I don't know. I didn't prepare for this. You're telling me you're going to say that.
No, I'm messing with you. You don't actually have to say it. But in all seriousness, congratulations to another career going out. And if we're still doing this podcast 5 years from now, we're going to have the argument on the show, just like we did with Devin Hester in the Hall of Fame list. Does he deserve to be put in the next round? The answer is yes. So with that being said, and with that intro aside, Rick, as always, outstanding, mind-blowing fact. Justin, your trivia, but new this time. I have no idea what it alludes to. So what do we got this time?
So we're gonna change it up a little bit. We're gonna get to know some specific NFL players. I'm gonna give you guys some facts. We'll do one round of guesses, and then if you don't get it, I'll give you some more. And then the third round, I'll try and make it a little obvious. If you guys can't get it, then but you're gonna try and guess this NFL player. It could be any player from past, present. It's gonna be good.
John Hall.
Who?
John Hall.
All right, I'll change the guy now.
Kicker John Hall, extraordinaire.
All right. Born in Detroit, this player went to Notre Dame and was drafted in the first round by the Los Angeles Rams.
Notre Dame, first round, LA Rams.
This definitely has to be an older player because I can't think of any Notre Dame players on this current LA team.
Yeah.
They also haven't had their first round pick in God knows how long.
I was gonna say that. Jeez. Yeah, no, I think you're right about that, Jorg. I think it has to be more of a further back guy because you're right. I mean the Rams were in LA for how many years before they moved to St. Louis?
Good amount.
Yeah.
We also have to think like first round pick by the LA Rams. That doesn't mean he wasn't there when they were St. Louis. So could this have been one of their last picks before they moved to St. Louis? You have to think of.
Oh. Do you know what? That's actually a really good really good point there, Jorg. I like that. When did they move to St. Louis? It was in the 90s, right? They moved to St. Louis?
I think so.
Okay.
Does that count as one of your hints, Justin, or can you tell us?
What? Oh, I'm not going to tell you a hint. You guys got to make a guess, and then I'll give you another hint afterwards.
Dang you.
Did he go to Notre Dame?
I don't know. Why don't you make a guess?
Wait. No, but were they in St. Louis? Oh, although did he go to Notre Dame?
Damn. Are you thinking the same guy I'm thinking?
I might be.
Born in Detroit, went to Notre Dame, first round pick of the LA Rams. I think I know who it is, but no, Jerk. Who's on your mind?
The guy who was on my mind, but I don't think he went to Notre Dame, was Dickerson. But then my mind remembered that he didn't go to Notre Dame. He went somewhere else.
I think he went to like Cal or USC or something like that. Yeah,
he didn't go to Notre Dame.
No.
And then also me not remembering if they were like they may have been in LA by the time they drafted him, and then they moved to St. Louis shortly after.
No, I think they were in LA until the 90s.
Don't worry about getting it wrong the first guess. Like I said, you guys have 3 rounds, so
yeah, but I want to put a decent first guess out there.
We like to be good here.
I'm trying to think of any defense.
Let's see if I can crack this on my first guess here. This is probably a very old guy, and I don't think Justin's ever heard of him. Potentially, Emil Sitko.
Emil Sitko is not the answer.
Okay, I was gonna say.
I mean, he may fit those characteristics. Again, I've never heard of him, but that's not the player that I had in mind.
He was born in Fort Wayne, Indiana, but that's okay.
Okay.
Jared, oh man,
Who you got, Jared?
I don't have an actual guess, and so I kind of just want to say I really don't. I was going to be fully honest with you both. I just no, that's what I was going to say. I wanted to be funny with it. I know he played for the Rams at some point. I don't think he was drafted by them, nor was he Was he a first round pick? I don't know how the draft worked back in the day. Just for the name value and because it's funny to say, Dick Night Train Lane is my guess.
Nice. No, we're not going to go with Dick Night Train Lane.
Damn.
All right, round 2, guys. This Hall of Fame running back won a Offensive Rookie of the Year, Comeback Player of the Year, was a 6-time Pro Bowler, and a Super Bowl champion.
Wait, can you? Well, you said Hall of Fame running back. You
Hall of
said
Fame running back,
6 Pro Bowls,
6 Pro Bowls.
Comeback Player of the Year.
He won in the span of his career, Comeback Player of the Year, Offensive Rookie of the Year, and Walter Payton Man of the Year, and a Super Bowl.
Okay. Wait, no, not him. No, he didn't go to Notre Dame. No, he didn't go to Notre Dame. No, never mind.
Who didn't go to Notre Dame?
No, I was immediately my mind went to a running back, and I'm like, no, because he won Offensive Rookie of the Year, but he didn't go to Notre Dame, and he was never able to come back to get Comeback Player of the Year.
You're thinking Todd Gurley.
Todd Gurley, yep. But he didn't have enough career to A, come back for the Comeback Player of the Year, and B, I don't think he
didn't win the Super Bowl either.
Well, he also went to Georgia, so I mean, that's an immediate disqualifier right there.
Like I was saying, that immediately disqualified because I'm like,
no, a lot of different reasons why it's not Todd Gurley.
Yeah. Hey, he hit like two or three of those criteria, so
I know it.
Do you?
I do. I know it. I want to see if Jerk can figure it out.
No, I won't.
Give it a guess, Jerk.
Running back. This, my running back history, as much as I love running backs compared to most, my running back draft history for the Los Angeles Rams just isn't the highest of caliber. I could just be funny and say another name that has nothing to do with the Rams, but I'm genuinely trying to think of first round running backs.
Jerk, just remember this, that as we've seen many a time in this league, he might have been drafted by the Rams. Doesn't mean that he had those accolades with the Rams.
Well, he definitely had one of those accolades with the
Rams.
Yes.
I was going to say he had to have done one of those things with the Rams.
Doesn't mean he did everything with the Rams.
True, but I'm just trying to think Comeback Player of the Year.
All right, Rick, since you know it, do we want to give the final hint and see if Jared can get it from there?
No, I won't. Just end my pain.
I have confidence that you'll get it. No, the third hint's always the easiest.
Well, let me ask you a question. What does your final hint pertain to?
The final hint will give a decent.
I trust you. I trust you. I'm stupid. It won't.
I trust me. I would be surprised if you didn't get it because after the final hint, it will become pretty obvious.
Well, do you think? Because I have a dead giveaway final hint because I know who it is.
That's what it is pretty much.
Yeah. So
6 Pro Bowl, Super Bowl, Comeback Player of the Year. Comeback Player of the Year. That's the part that's getting me. I'm trying to think of these Comeback Player of the Year awards. It's an award I just never cared about growing up.
Is that what gave it away? Was it the Comeback Player of the Year?
No, it's the one that's tripping me up because I can't think of I can't think of running back.
Giving away to you. You don't know who it is, but Rick got it.
No, yeah, I'm sure Rick that he got it.
No, you know what it was? It was running back and it was Super Bowl because I had an idea in my head. I actually had several other ideas in my head of guys who went to Notre Dame who were first round picks by the Rams. Emil Sitko was one of them, by the way, from like the 40s. But hey, I had cousins with the Notre Dame, dude, so I know all about that.
No, I understand that, but Jesus Christ, you went back to the 40s.
But when you said running back, those two other guys, Mike Fanning and Cecil Seymour, they kind of went by the wayside. So, I know who it is now because there was 4 guys in my head. I know who it is.
All right, you want the final hint now?
Sure, I'm not going to get it, but sure. Wait, hold on. To properly play the game, let me give a funny second guess that is totally wrong. Sure. Herschel Walker, even though he didn't play.
No, actually, he was lined up for another one. So this Pittsburgh Steeler Hall of Famer retired directly after winning his
Jerome Bettis
Super Bowl. Jerome Bettis,
son of a gun,
is the answer to this trivia.
I mean,
he went to Notre Dame.
He went to Notre Dame. He was drafted by the Rams, played in both L.A. and St. Louis.
Yep.
After 3 years, was he traded or did he sign with the Pittsburgh Steelers?
I thought they just was traded.
I know that they said he had an issue. He went back to school at one point, and then he was traded to the Pittsburgh Steelers. And had a Hall of Fame career.
Yep. Could have also alluded to the fact that he won the Super Bowl in his hometown, because that was a Super Bowl at Ford Field in Detroit as well. That was a clue. And also the dead giveaway would have been if you had mentioned his nickname or his final phrase before retirement. I think the bus finally stops here.
Yeah, I didn't. I figured the bus was a little too much.
Yeah, no, it's definitely
That's
too on
why
the nose for sure.
I figured if I said Pittsburgh Steelers Hall of Fame running back, that's it. It's over.
Yeah.
Who else is
Yeah,
that did it for me.
Yeah.
Rocky Blyer maybe, but
Right.
I mean, yeah, but we knew that he wasn't. I
I
don't.
have his book.
Most of the time they weren't.
Yeah,
I'm not
But
going
yeah.
that far back, but you never know.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Oh man. Oh well, there's that. So after two completely off the cuff wrong guesses, got it at the end.
And now the world knows about Emil Sitko. So there you go.
Indeed
There
they
you
do. Indeed they do. Oh man, Justin, good stuff right there. This new version of the trivia, I think, is going to be a good one. We're probably gonna have to make a new ticker at some point because Justin's trivia, but new just doesn't fit the bill for a long term lower third.
We should call it Name That Player.
Yeah.
Oh.
So we'll get into that.
Chaotic.
Yeah, something like that. So we'll get to that at some point. But a chaotic new twist to the trivia game that we all know and love, and it's going to be fun in the coming weeks and months to be able to play this constantly and see just how wrong I'll be getting these guesses and how Rick will get them by the second one.
I also chose a stable player. Now everyone's fair game.
Yeah,
it could be a guy I played 1 year.
Well, I mean, that's the way you got to do it. Is that you got to have a nice easy lead into the segment for the first round, and then the next one it's going to be the third string kicker on the Dallas Texans from 1962.
Didn't even play a game,
but he was on the roster.
Can't wait for the Emmanuel Arsenault edition of that game. It'll be easy.
Well, there goes that
guy. So with that being said, boys, the tagline of the show for the people that aren't aware: fun, football, and chaos. We've had a lot of fun this morning. Let's start to talk about a little bit of a football. And it begins with the massive salary cap bump that occurred here news breaking of it over the last 24, 48 hours or so, that the NFL salary cap is getting a much bigger bump to it than was initially thought. Now, going into this season, obviously the salary cap has been going up the last couple of years ever since post-COVID. The cap, of course, went down in 2021 because of everything, but it has been going up steadily the last few years, and this year was already projected to be a pretty good jump. Teams were going to be somewhere in the 240 millions in the salary cap range, probably at the lower end of that spectrum, knowing the NFL, so probably between 241 to 244, I believe, if I'm not, if anything says, but we get more. Over the last 24 hours, and this was broken to us by Justin specifically, the NFL salary cap will be taking a massive leap to $255 million. So a $30 million jump from what last season's cap number was, and the biggest increase that the cap has seen since COVID has happened. I think it was the mid 2000s was the last time a salary cap bump of this percentage, if you go based off percentage from last year to this year as well. So it was a massive increase. So this is going to be very interesting, obviously, to say the least. I think there's a lot of it, like just a lot of general ideas to discuss when it comes to the idea of the cap going up by $30 million for the sport. Rick and I, being NHL fans, we're lucky if the salary cap goes up $2 million, let alone the NFL one is now going up $30 million. So, Justin, I will throw it to you first because you are the one that got this on our radars when the news broke. So your reaction when the cap jumped and just your initial thoughts on what this could do for this upcoming, how perfect it is, of course, obviously it makes sense, but how perfect it is for free agency coming up.
Well, I was shocked. I mean, it's a monumental jump. I think that it's going to put everyone in play. Like all of a sudden, every team that was strapped for salary cap, which honestly there was quite a few this year. Now all of a sudden you're seeing teams going out there and making sure they can create some cap space by restructuring some contracts. I mean, I think the Saints today freed up $30 million in cap space on top of whatever. Or maybe not on top of whatever, just including the salary cap jump. But I know they restructured 3 or 4 different starters to get some salary cap space. I haven't looked at the numbers yet, but this is a fairly large free agent class. And you're going to see a lot of bigger name players, I think, hopping teams. The question is there a team that's going to have a lot of cap space that maybe wasn't so successful last year that's really going to make a big jump based on some big free agency names? Probably not the Jets, but, I just got to throw that in there. But they also are not one of those teams that has a lot of cap space. So it's going to be interesting to see what guys move where and what guys get paid.
And this could be very interesting because, like you said, I feel like the depth of this free agency class coming up, and probably within the next week or so, well, maybe on next show, we'll talk a little bit more about just the general names that are available in this free agency class. But there's a good amount of names. Maybe not. This isn't necessarily a superstar driven free agency class. I mean, how often do we really get those, right? But this is a strong depth free agency class where a lot of very talented guys, perhaps number 2 receivers on teams or number 3s, are now going to get a step up and they'll become a number 1 or 1B or number 2 on another team, depending on where they were before. So it's kind of that free agency class. I think, obviously, for me, the number 1 name that comes to mind in this class is T. Higgins, as a guy who's going to get paid, and he's going to be paid like a number 1 to go to a new team. So that'll be something to say at the very least. But
the Bengals, I think, announced that they are franchise tagging him.
They tagged him.
Yeah.
True, but I'm still. Teams have rescinded the franchise tag before, so while they have it, was that transition?
But the thing about that too is that the salary cap increase was about $30 million per club, which allowed the Bengals to do this because we were questioning going into the offseason with the money that they weren't going to have, were they going to even be able to offer this tag to T. Higgins? And now they have. But to your point, I mean. Yeah, you look at the top 5 names, arguably, in this free agency class. Chris Jones is arguably number 1. Kirk Cousins is a guy who's, going to command a lot of money. Justin Matabuke had a great year with the Ravens, so he's going to command a lot of money too. Other guys that are in that consideration would be Josh Allen, not of the Bills, but of the Jaguars. L'Jarius Sneed, you guys were talking about the Chiefs last week about, this defense. Well, now the extra money kind of allows you to maybe keep a second guy that you might not have been able to keep if that first guy commanded so much money that it wasn't going to allow you to do that. So, it's definitely a boon for this league. And I mean, you can point to a lot of different things. You can point to the restrictions, the streaming revenue. You can point to Taylor, of course, being the key for all this. But at the same time, too, it just capitalizes on a very good business year for the NFL. In a year that, to be honest with you, I think more people were invested because there was that authenticity of we don't know what's going to happen this year because of the Chiefs not being the team that they were in the regular season, the Eagles dropping off, the Lions having as great a year as they did, teams that made the playoffs that were big surprises, the Packers being the 7th seed to win against the Cowboys in Dallas, that woke people up too. Yep. So, and again, I mean, guys that moved to other spots, Baker Mayfield kind of re-energized Tampa Bay when it came to like how well they were playing this year. There were great stories all throughout. The Texans were a great story too. So there's a lot of things to get invested into a league that, to be fair, was hurting for PR a bunch, but to have this kind of strong business showing gives you an indication that they may have figured some things out. Some things they'll never be able to figure out, let's be honest here, but they may have figured some things out to help keep them moving forward. And I think too, what helped also well, I mean, it sucks for the people who don't have it, but let's be real here. The playoff game on Peacock was a massive success financially for them. The Black Friday game on Amazon Prime was a massive success. It was still terrible for Jets, but it was a success for.
It was just a terrible game. It wasn't even like that entertaining of a game. Like it was just the Dolphins went up immediately, and then nothing happened the entire game.
But what's interesting about it too is that they cornered the market basically on football for that entire weekend, and they exploited a couple of loopholes in doing so. I don't know if you guys saw this because I read about this, with what they're doing in week 1. So what happened was the NFL kind of has this rule, like the FCC has a rule that you cannot have pro football games on Fridays naturally, or like the NFL won't stream a game on a Friday if the first Friday of the season, let's say, falls in the second full week of September. For whatever reason, they've said they weren't going to do that. This year coming up, Labor Day is early. So that means the first Friday is not in the second week. Therefore, that's why we're getting that game in Brazil between the Eagles and God knows who. But what they also happen to have, there was a loophole in the Black Friday streaming rights that said, as long as the game is primarily over before 6 p.m., you can stream the game. And that's why they were allowed to have the Dolphins and Jets play. Well, the Dolphins play, the Jets were there on that Friday, because the game was primarily over by 6 p.m. So therefore, it was all good. So they were smart in their business decisions, their tactical acumen to know where they could exploit that revenue stream And that also kind of collected a lot more money to say, hey, we understand, so let's give more money that's due. How does this help? Running backs are going to get more tags. Let's be honest here.
Hopefully.
I mean, that's kind of where I feel like this is going to happen, because the tags are now a little more affable for certain positions. So, I mean, teams that were, worried about maybe we're not going to sign this running back again. Well, they have a little more money to play with, and if that's a need, then you want to keep your guy. Then I mean, the Giants have that decision with Saquon Barkley again. If they're going to tag him for the second year in a row.
Yep.
But this is the funny thing in New York. The question was, well, if you don't want to tag Barkley, how about Devin Singletary from the Texans? That's a cheaper option. But now the question is, do you even need to consider the cheaper option if you have this ability to? So, it creates a lot more intrigue for this offseason, I think.
It does. And, you've mentioned the salary, the franchise tag multiple times now. The article that I read specifically mentioned that this could be, for a lot of teams, what gets the franchise tag going now. Because as much as the franchise tag is a thing and, it gets used, it doesn't get used as much as you'll really think it does in every single free agency cycle. I mean, how many teams just don't use their franchise tag for 2-3 off seasons at a time because they just don't think it's, beneficial to the salary cap. But now that you're getting this extra $10 million compared to what the initial projection was for this upcoming season, that makes a big difference. And like Justin said, it's already gotten teams are restructuring, like the Saints, for example, with the extra cap space along with getting their guys. This is probably going to be for some of those teams that are in the negative and are still in the negative to, it might save them the loss of needing to cut someone, perhaps. And now they might be able to keep a player that they thought they were going to have to originally cut as well. But like you said, I think the franchise tag is going to go up because, I mean, you just mentioned a couple names there, Rick, that they had career seasons and these guys could end up being franchise tagged for 1-year deals with these teams. T. Higgins was the name you guys just mentioned. I have to imagine with the Chiefs now and with this salary cap bump that one of their guys, most likely the L'Jarius Sneed, is going to get, if it hasn't already been officially reported yet. I mean, it's probably going to happen. He's getting franchise tag, if not already. You mentioned Josh Allen with the Jaguars, Rick. That's a team that needs to keep that kind of talent there with how lackluster the pass rush as a whole is. So probably that it's going to be probably a lot more rumors going around. Like you said, we could see teams use it a lot more. And you mentioned the Giants, they could do it with Barkley, or they could do I think it was, you sent us the article, if I'm not mistaken, the transition tag and what they could do with their safety McKinney as well. So it just leads to a lot more of what these teams might be able to do. Like we talk about how good it is for the players, and it is good for the players. We'll get to that in a moment, like the idea of it. But obviously for the teams, this gives a lot of flexibility for these teams that, let's be real here, there were a lot of teams that, going into this offseason originally, again, teams were already planning around the previous projection of the cap. Now they get this extra money. This is going to be critical for teams like Justin mentioned, the Saints, like the Chargers, like the Cowboys, and others of that ilk that were in the negative going into this offseason. Figure that out. Or, no team in particular for this one, obviously, but a team that's going to be cutting someone, going to eat a lot of dead cap. That extra cap boost for this season will help, a light bounce on that. It's still going to be rough, but it's not as well, no, it's still critical. Denver, I'm sorry. Yeah, there's no way to sugarcoat it. I tried to help the Denver Broncos there, but I'm like, no, it's a lost cause. So that being said, there's that. But I want to go to the players because, Rick, you just mentioned Baker Mayfield for this. Man, he picked a great time to have a good year on a 1-year contract before cashing out, huh? Because now, like you said, I still don't know if Tampa's necessarily going to franchise tag him in particular, but that 2-year contract is looking, it might have a couple extra dollar signs on it compared to what it was going to be a week or two ago. Not by a significant amount. They're not going to use the entire extra $10 million on Baker, but it is more of a thing where he could get maybe extra $2, $3, $4 million in guaranteed. And that honestly, for guys, we know how it works with the NFL with the contracts more than any other sport. It's the guaranteed money that's the biggest sticking point for a lot of these guys, right? So the guaranteed money, I think, is going to be something to look at this offseason and how much is guaranteed because you had this massive cap projection. I mean, you would hope for the league, like you mentioned, Rick, all the genius loopholes that they're able to do in the marketing and all that. Maybe they get another, it's not going to be 30 million every single year, but it's 15, 20 million next year, 15, 20 million the year after that. We're talking about maybe by 2030, if not earlier, we're slowly approaching $300 million for the salary cap. Yeah. Maybe a little bit past 2030. Maybe that's a little bit too looking ahead, but it's going to be a reality at some point.
With Tampa too, just quickly, you mentioned it. This also creates another intriguing scenario because I think the Bucs are going to try and keep Mike Evans with every fiber of their being, as is their right, and they should. So now that you have this extra money throwing around, well, we can run it back, but does Mike Evans want a little bit more? And can you offer a little bit more? Because let's be honest here, the guy deserves it, number one. And number two, if Tampa's not going to hire him, there's going to be a bidding war for Mike Evans because of just how phenomenal of a receiver that he is. So that's the thing. That's the con to this, I think, too, is that now it creates a situation where these teams don't have that excuse anymore of we don't have the money. Now you have the money. So if you don't sign the players, it wasn't because you didn't have the money. You just didn't want that guy on your team anymore. At least that's how that can come off. So if Tampa refuses to negotiate, let's say, with Baker after this great season, it was, thanks for your time. We're going to go ahead and bring Kyle Trask back or get a quarterback in the draft. If the Giants, Saquon Barkley's saying, I want to be a Giant for life, and now you've got all this money to play with, but if they say, nah, you're done, goodbye, then you never really wanted him in the first place, did you? That's how the thought process is going to go for some of these players and some of these fan bases. And that's a sticking point too. That's kind of the pride cometh before the fall / the dark side of this is that now there's really not that excuse of, oh, we don't have the money to make these deals. Yeah, you do now. For certain teams, you've got it. So if you want to keep that player.
Well, it could be that, but now you could be in an unlucky situation where multiple guys are coming up on contracts and you need to figure out, let's just stick with Tampa here for an example. Antoine Winfield Jr. is due a contract. Yep. Because he finished out his rookie deal. He was not a first-round pick, so there was never a fifth-year option to worry about. They have to extend him this offseason. He just made the Pro Bowl. Not Pro Bowl. Was it All-Pro, right? All-Pro. He just made the All-Pro team. That's going to be a very hefty contract that they're going to have to pay. And I don't say hefty as a negative to him. He deserves the money he's going to get paid. Is it going to be Tampa? Now Tampa needs to balance everything of, okay, there's Baker, there's Mike Evans, there's Antoine Winfield Jr. If you're somehow able to keep all three of them in a dream world, you're going to have to probably still let go of an extra player. Because can you really get all three of those guys plus whatever other holes you need to plug up on their roster? It's one of these things where I definitely get your point. In certain situations, it's going to be a case of, well, you said money was the issue. Now there's this extra flux. Put up or shut up. Put your money where your mouth is type of deal. But I think there's still a lot of instances to where this still won't help certain teams in certain situations. Yep. Yeah, it's nice to have that extra, but now does that mean the players are going to try to negotiate for more in certain instances? And that complicates negotiations still, because we're thinking about it from the team perspective. Just I want to throw it to you from the player perspective now, to where, with the extra money coming in, teams that already were projected to have a bunch of cap space, right? You have the Washington Commanders, who I think have the most salary cap space going into this free agency period as of now. You have the New England Patriots, who were second, third most. They're still going to be up there. This is going to affect contract negotiations for teams. And Justin, throwing this idea to you, do you think that we're going to see perhaps a signing or two? Just, I'm not asking for a specific player or team, but just like the general idea of a signing or two that it might surprise us that the player is going to that team, but ultimately it's because that team now has way more money to play with now, and they could splurge a little bit more than what we would have thought of a week or two ago.
Well, this is huge for the mid-level free agents, because those are the guys that are really going to have the biggest salary increase. The top level players are going to get what they get. There's always like a periodic leveled increase for each position. Chris Jones, I'm sure, will set the new market for defensive linemen. There's going to be Brian Burns, who I'm sure may set the market for edge linemen if he doesn't stay in Carolina. There's lots of different guys that'll set their standard bump. But you're going to see what you saw last year, which was very interesting too, which is why it's so interesting that it's going to happen again this year, is you're going to see these mid-level guys that were decent for their team. They're depth players. They're guys that'll play on third down. These guys are going to get $6, $7, $8 million a year, as opposed to the 3 or 4 that they might have gotten before the salary cap jump. There's a number of teams now that are going to need depth. I mean, with this jump, the Bengals now all of a sudden, they're going to have the 4th most cap space. They're going to have almost $70 million. Now all of a sudden they have the chance. They'll franchise T. Higgins. They'll sign Chase to a long-term deal, and then they'll work on T. Higgins' contract after the fact. Then they're going to still have, $20 million to play with?
Yep.
There's going to be a ton of teams that are on the cusp with a lot of cap space that are going to say we need mid-level players, we need depth, and we're not going to win necessarily with a superstar signing. We're going to win with a team effort, and we're going to go out and we're going to sign the most mid-level depth players, guys that have a chance to really prove something that they weren't able to prove with the other team, but still going to have contributing playing time and contributing stats and factors like that. There's going to be a few teams that we can get into that are going to have these excellent opportunities now to really capitalize on what was a strong season.
Yeah. And it's going to be very interesting to see. And Rick mentioned a couple of names, and perhaps in the next episode or the episode that we do when we come back from our break, depending on what has happened at that point, we can talk about some of the names that are projected, some of these guys that have career years. And now, like you said, Justin, they're going in and maybe they were going to get, let's say hypothetically before this, 3 years, 20 million. That's probably bumped up to 3 years, 25 million, 3 years, 26 million. Like it's going to be more of that. And this is one of those amazing things that it just extremely, I mean, I don't think it shouldn't, I don't think there's any way to say this isn't beneficial to the players as a whole when you get extra money in there that teams could potentially pay out. So this is going to be a very interesting free agency period that, as you both have already mentioned, it was already interesting. A couple, pretty notable names for the most part are coming in: Josh Allen, Brian Burns, and what their futures will be if they will leave their big cat name based teams and if they'll go somewhere else to where they'll be paid hefty salaries. But it's going to be quite the interesting free agency period, to say the very least. And, and Rick, you kind of mentioned it, the NFL, they were able to crack a code in some way. They were able to get that for 2023. Now they're going into 2024, as you said, the loopholes that they're able to get to with the Brazil game. Like, is there no reason to believe, and again, I already said this before, it's not going to be 30 million every single year, but is there no reason to believe that the league the teams shouldn't expect somewhat significant cap bumps this season, like going into future seasons? Like, realistically right now, of course, the 2024 season has to happen, but what reason should teams not game plan for the fact that right now the salary cap is 255 million, right? Why should they not expect it to be 270 million next year at the minimum?
So that's an interesting question here, but I think the thing you have to determine and figure out is the overall revenue that the NFL is going to have. I think this past year was over $10 billion. And I mean, if it continues to be that way, then I don't see why your argument won't be valid. It will be 270, but you can't expect that every single time out because certain things also rise. With the salary cap rise, getting into the weeds of economics here, inflation also rises, ticket prices also rise, gas price goes up, car prices, et cetera, et cetera. It's $20 for a hot dog now. We're at $15 in the stadium prior. Certain things go up. So that's kind of the supply and demand, if you will. There's this great supply and this great demand that you have with the NFL games right now and going to an NFL game. But at the same time, should the 2024 season happen during another recession? Should it happen during another, global incident? Should there be another, grain shortage in Eastern Europe or whatever the case is, to get political and whatnot? Like, those things also have factors in it. So you kind of have to play that game where, like, yeah, this was good for now, but can you expect 270 next year? Probably not. You can think that it's like I like it like this. It's your reach school. It's your dream school is 270 million. That's your dream school. That's like you want to go to North Carolina or you want to go to Harvard or whatnot. Whereas like 260 is probably your safe school. That's like your Siena or your Mount St. Vincent or your Queens College, if you will. In that case, that's like 200 for Queens College. But regardless, like you can think about 270, that's all well and good, but you got to kind of see how objections fall out, because if you plan for 270 and you fall short by even $1 million, if it's 269, let's say. Like that seems like
nice.
Insignificant. Thank you. That seems insignificant, but it does hurt your projections to the bottom line. I work for a company that they're selling 10,000 bikes a year, and the problem is once you put one bike in the house, no one wants another one. So where's that 10,000 coming from? Like, that's kind of the supply and demand and the socioeconomic you have to kind of deal with here. It's a massive bump, but you got to tread carefully on the future projections, because yes, you have a good product, but who is to say that the next CTE, the next DeMar Hamlin situation isn't around the corner somewhere, knock on wood, it's not. But again, you have to kind of understand those extemporaneous factors are still there that could hurt your bottom line, not make it go down, make it go up precipitously less than what you expected.
Economics 101 with a Professor Podfather there, to say the very least.
Papa Pod.
Papa Pod. Oh, did you hear us say that last week?
I did hear that. Yes, I'm a fan of that. I'm a fan of that. Yeah.
Papa
He's a
Pod.
proud Papa Pod.
Well,
Proud
yes,
Papa
yes,
Pod,
very
Professor
proud.
Papa Pod, PhD Papa Pod.
Oh God, too many P's in my name, but it's fine.
Hey, that's what happens when you take on the monarchy of Podfather.
Yeah, there you go. That's the life.
So with that being said, it's going to be something to watch out for. And again, not next episode because we're still a ways away from more franchise tags being announced. And then obviously free agency itself is going to be coming, weeks from now. It's going to be fun to see what teams get in the splurging deal. Justin's already said that the Jets probably aren't going to be that big of a player in this free agency class, but could they maybe get a decent player? Who knows? Yeah. Will Rick's new team that he ends up rooting for, will they be one of the players in free agency, or will he be rooting for a team that just did absolutely nothing? He will deal with those emotions in a while's time, to say the very least.
Yeah. Emotions. That's what NFL's all about. Emotions.
Justin, before we finish out, you were about to say something real quick.
I was gonna defend the Jets. It's fine. We can move on.
Well, I didn't say anything bad. I'm saying maybe they'll be a player.
Well, I think that as of right now, they don't have a ton of cap space, only about 15 mil. But I expect them to. This is Rodgers last year. I think under contract technically. I think that they expect to restructure or move forward. Maybe they sign him to a small extension and they give him a few extra years and they spread that money out, and they're going to free up some cap space because they got to capitalize on that trade.
Well, yeah, because if I recall, too, isn't this year the year that he's owed like $109 million or something?
Yeah, yeah, and they still have $15 million in cap space, so they'll restructure a ton of different things. They're going to free up a lot more money, and it's an interesting free agent class. I was just looking it over. It's going to be very interesting to see. It's very defensive line heavy, very defense heavy. There's also a lot of safeties and corners out there, and it's not very offense heavy, but in terms of the offensive players, there's a high ceiling. There's a few good receivers, and I think about 5 starting running backs. It's going to be very interesting to see what happens to them. I think that you're going to see a lot of these guys change teams now because a lot of them were spurned by their former team last free agency or last season. Mm-hmm. So I don't know if you looked at the names. It's Derrick Henry, Austin Eckler, Tony Pollard, Saquon Barkley, and Josh Jacobs.
Right.
Yeah. Top running backs that look like they're probably going to be on the move. It's going to be interesting to see what kind of market there is for them, where they go, and how much they get.
Yep. And, a decent amount of quarterbacks, honestly, in that regard as well, because, and this will be the last point to bring up, in congruence with both the salary cap and this, the future of some of the quarterbacks. I think Justin sent me, I don't know if he sent it to you, but Justin sent me kind of like an initial list at this moment of quarterbacks that are going to end up being available in this free agency class. And Gardner Minshew is going to be available. We know, I forget if they were on the list necessarily, Justin, but we know Jimmy G and Russell Wilson are both going to end up being released more likely.
They were not, but yes, they'll probably be on that list.
You need to plan for those two guys being available now. Kirk Cousins, is Minnesota going to end up keeping him, or are they going to let him go? That's a legitimate question of what they're going to do. And if they do make that decision, they don't want him anymore. First off, good luck with that quarterback room as of now. And then second, where is he going to potentially go? Right. So it's a very interesting conversation, to say the very least, to have. And then once we have a lot more movement happen, we can talk about it, because at the end of the day, boys, we need things to be solidified. It's fun to speculate. It's fun to project. It's fun to do things like that. I'm sure right now Justin wants to cut Alan Lazard like most Jets fans do to get that salary cap space back, but he can't do that because,
or Randall Cobb.
Or Randall Cobb. Well, didn't they?
Randall Cobb was only a 1-year deal.
I was going to say, I don't think they were that.
Anyways, why not? And by the way, Jerg, you mentioned a decent quarterback class. You forgot Ryan Tannehill.
Yeah, I know. That's why that makes it below average in that regard. But that being said, it's going to be fun. But, like I was saying, we're going to project. We're going to have fun with that as we're talking about, the free agents and franchise tag ideas in the coming weeks. But, sometimes we need things to be solidified. We need things to be official for us to really give our proper thoughts about it, boys. This podcast started like that. The very first episode was Justin and I, the pilot episode, talking about moves that had been made and slight projection on moves that will be made. But this next segment, no projections to be talked about. Stuff that has happened, and we can finally talk about it in full. Ladies and gentlemen, the NFL head coach hirings for the 2024 season. The head coaching cycle has, of course, come and gone. You all already know that. But we finally get to talk about it as a whole. We're going to run through all of the hires officially and give our, in some instances, brief thoughts. I think 2 of the names we already discussed, so it'll just be regurgitating what we said already and moving on. And then some of these names we didn't really get to discuss yet, and we're going to talk about, was this the right move by this team? Did they make the right hire or not? So we're going to have a little bit of fun with that. So, boys, That being said, and originally this was going to be a grading segment. If you guys want to give a full grade, if you have that ready in your mind, you can. If not, if you just want to say good, bad, indifferent, in between, whatever, we can also do that as well, boys. So that being said, let's go to the first name. And ironically, the list of names I have here, this guy is one of the guys we did talk about already. So let's get through this one relatively quick. The Las Vegas Raiders with Antonio Pierce. When we discussed this on the podcast during the playoffs, there was nothing but praise from the three of us. This was something that the Raiders needed. They weren't going to make the same mistake of letting an interim head coach go after having a better second half of the season than the previous guy. Were they going to make that mistake? They decided not to. It turns out Mark Davis can learn from previous mistakes. So that being said, Antonio Pierce, Raiders, I think that was a bang-up move. Culture guy to help set the foundation and really help along the potential transition this team might be going through over the next year or two, depending on who stays and who goes from that core going forward. Of course, we've talked about on the show before. Justin has said maybe Devontae Adams isn't going to be a Raider going into 2024. Who knows? But just generally speaking, Antonio Pierce, I think we all agreed, and I don't think any of us are going to change our thoughts here, was the right move by the Raiders.
Yeah, it was an easy selection to make. Like we talked about in the show that we mentioned it. This is a guy who was a leader. He wasn't a coach. He was the leader in that locker room, and he was a guy they could relate to, and he brought out a spirit in this team that you hadn't seen since Rich Bisaccia was there. So, yeah, home run by the Raiders. Very rare that we say that, but home run by the Raiders.
Indeed. Justin, any final thoughts?
It's going to be interesting to see. It's going to be interesting to see where they go from here, because as great as I think this move was, does not have a lot of head coaching experience, doesn't have a ton of coaching experience. So they're going to have to bring in some veteran guys. They're really going to have to bring in guys to be the coordinators, the offensive and defensive coordinator, and special teams as well. And they are currently 10th in cap space with the 9th overall pick, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
It's going to be very interesting to see which direction they go.
13th overall pick, actually.
13th. That's what I said.
I know. I heard you. Just wanted to regurgitate and confirm.
9, 13, the numbers, they mix from time to time.
Yeah.
So,
I can give or take 4 usually on all of my guesses. I
100%.
said Aaron Rodgers was 12.
Well, it's a pick just before his team or a pick 3 picks after his team. So, it's okay.
You get it.
Yeah.
All right. That being said, let's go to the next name. We have not discussed this name in full detail yet. So finally, the Washington Commanders and Dan Quinn. Justin, I will throw this one to you first so you could give your fresh thoughts on this, because we didn't really discuss this on the pod. I don't think. Probably a little bit of text. Your thought, and before this, remember, the Commanders hired a committee to help decide who the next head coach was going to be, right? And this was the conclusion for them. Was the money you spent on the committee worth it? That's a big question. So, Justin, your thoughts on Dan Quinn being the new head coach for the Washington Commanders?
Correct me if I'm wrong. Was Dan Quinn the coach that took the Falcons to the Super Bowl when they lost?
Yes.
So, look, I think Dan Quinn's a good coach. Everywhere he's gone, they've absolutely loved him. I mean, he really made a name for himself in Seattle during that time period where they were winning Super Bowls. He went to Atlanta. And unfortunately, I think maybe we have more to do with maybe that team going stale because they got old. I don't think that the GM necessarily kept young talent influx, and they lost an excellent coordinator in Shanahan. So that team kind of fell apart under him. And then the Cowboys defense has been excellent the last few years under his leadership. I think it was a good signing. It's interesting to see that they didn't go with Bieniemy, even though he kind of looked like he may have turned that offense around a little bit. But the question here is, who is he going to be coaching? Because the Washington Commanders have a league-leading $87 million in cap space. They have a ton of high-end draft picks. And they got a lot of players that might not be there after next year. So the question is, this is a good guy to bring in during a reset, I think. But we're going to see, does he have the ability to help build a team? Does he have the mindset to coach a young, fresh new team? And what can he do for a franchise that, frankly, has been starving for some really good football? It's going to be very interesting to see. At the very least.
Right. And it is one of those things. in general, yes, Dan Quinn is a very good coach. He's an extremely good defensive coordinator. But I think we saw at the end of his Atlanta Falcons tenure that maybe the head coaching aspect is something that wasn't just meant for him. And, when you hire a committee to bring in a guy and you hire Dan Quinn, it's kind of one of those things where I don't think you needed the committee to come up with that decision. I think it was a little bit extra with them doing that. I don't think you needed a committee to make that decision.
But like I said, I don't think that they really. I mean, things fell apart in Atlanta because Julio Jones got old and they didn't have any backup receivers. Matt Ryan got old and they didn't have any offensive line. He couldn't throw the ball anymore. They lost their offensive coordinator. They were never able to get someone in to bring together a decent scheme after that. And I mean, the defense played all right, but really, what players were on that team when he got fired?
Question, although counterpoint to the offensive coordinator, Justin, who is the one deciding who the new offensive coordinator is? The head coach is a big decision.
Well, I don't, like I said, of course, and I would like to think that the head coach has a lot to do with that, but we've seen where people are brought in against coaches' wills. I mean, I don't think that Ron Rivera went out and said, "Give me Eric Bieniemy." That's competition, and after 4 seasons and not a lot of success, and especially being hurt on offense, I don't think that they necessarily had a great relationship there. And if you remember when they brought in a highly touted, did they bring in the LSU offensive guy for him his first year without Shanahan?
No,
they didn't bring in someone from LSU.
That was Joe Brady was in Carolina, I think.
Yeah, he went to Carolina.
That's more recent. I'm talking back when Dan Quinn was head coach.
Oh, in Atlanta, you mean?
Yeah,
they
brought someone in. It didn't seem like it was something that fit. They immediately didn't gel, and things just fell apart. And I don't necessarily blame Dan Quinn. Dan Quinn had a good tenure for the most part in Atlanta. He brought them to their first Super Bowl, if I'm not mistaken. And of course, it was their second Super Bowl. And of course, it was a disappointment. But listen, that could be a different game if Mac doesn't break his leg in the first half. You know what I mean? They had to completely change that offensive scheme.
Or if you yell at your offensive coordinator to actually run the ball a little bit more.
Well, yeah.
But we've already had that Kyle Shanahan discussion on the show.
we can really dive deep into that another time. But I don't think that Dan Quinn's a bad hire. I think that it was smart of him to go to Dallas and really get his legs under him again, so that he can build up his coaching resume again. I think he's a smart, tough guy. I really do expect them to come out and play good football. They'll start with building the defense. If the quarterback doesn't work out with who's there, Howell?
Yep.
If Howell doesn't work out, they have a high draft pick. It'll be interesting to see if they draft a quarterback and trade Howell.
Well, I was going to say they have the second overall pick, do they not?
They do.
Yeah. So there's just so much going on with that franchise now, and even if you like or dislike the pick, it's hard to make a judgment because we don't really know who's going to be there.
Yeah.
My only thing is just if you're gonna have a hiring committee, Dan Quinn at the end of it. Like, I'm not saying I'm not against the idea of hiring Dan Quinn, but you have to have a hiring committee for that.
Well, let me defend that.
New owner.
Let me defend that. They have a new owner, but he's not really an owner. He's a managing partner, Josh Harris, who's got other partners, including Magic Johnson and a few other guys who were there too. They've got a brand new general manager in Adam Peters. So they're trying to bring a brand new facilitated mindset to a franchise that, remember, until Josh Harris took this team over, was run by Dan Scumbag Snyder. So, I mean, let's call it what it is here. Now, Dan Quinn, I think, could be a very good head coach. To Justin's point, 2 points, actually. One, not LSU, USC. Steve Sarkisian was the guy after Shanahan, but you're absolutely right. Yeah, there was a lot of clash between them. Is Cliff Kingsbury going to be any better? I mean, let's be honest here. He's the new offensive coordinator. Is he going to be any better?
Well, is he a Dan Quinn guy, or is this a forced hire?
I think this is a forced hire because I think they want Caleb Williams, which I think is the reason why you have him there. Their coaching staff is very, very much who's who. Brian Johnson, who's the Eagles offensive coordinator last year, is the assistant head coach this year. Kingsbury, who I mentioned. Anthony Lynn is the running backs coach. Friend of the show, David Blau, is the assistant quarterbacks coach. Bobby Ingram is the wide receiver coach. Justin's trivia answer, Ken Norton Jr. is their linebacker coach. And the other great Patriots special teamer, Larry Izzo, is the coordinator of special teams for the Commanders here this year. So they've got a lot of good staff. The problem is those guys don't play anymore. They're on the sidelines. So to Justin's point, yes, this is an interesting scenario for the Commanders here because Sam Howell seemed like the answer and was a good quarterback at times, but not consistently. And they had Jacoby Brissett, who they did nothing with, who's now an unrestricted free agent who probably goes somewhere else. You look at the rest of their free agent class, are they bringing back Kendall Fuller? I think you'd want to do that. What about Curtis Samuel? I know you still have McLaurin and Jahan Dotson, but you bring Samuel there with Brian Robinson. You've got a good offense here. Is quarterback the answer?
They never figured out how to use Samuel, and that's probably one of the more disappointing.
They never figured out how to use anybody. That's why they were never good under Ron Rivera.
They never figured out
7-10 3 years in a row, and they got lucky twice.
Yeah, basically. They never figure out how to use Samuel. And to your point, you mentioned like who could be there. Like this is a team that you sent us an article, Rick, of potential trades that could happen. I mean, they're probably not. That's the thing with potential trades. It's like it's nice on paper, but there's actuality that has to be involved. Probably one or two of the names that are pretty good on this team are not going to be on the team in 2025, which would be year 2 for Quinn. So it's going to be tough to grade it out. All I'm saying is that if the Cliff Kingsbury hire is yet another forced hire, I have a question for Dan Quinn. Why do you keep letting them force hires upon you? Like, I would have just stayed in Dallas for another year if this was going to be the case. If you're not going to let me pick my offensive coordinator, why deal with that?
But the thing about that, honestly, is that if there's one thing Dan Quinn doesn't know how to do, and he knows a lot of things, it's not offense. It's not his game. That's why when they went to the Super Bowl, it was more about Kyle Shanahan. Look at how Shanahan's progressed, and also the quarterback's coach was Matt LaFleur. Look at how he's progressed as well. Dan Quinn, for everything that he does defensively, he's a defensive wizard. Yep. His offensive acumen leaves a lot to be desired. So he's not going to question bringing in a guy who comes from this air raid style offense that Kingsbury came from at Texas Tech and USC. It didn't work in Arizona because he couldn't win in the second half. But if you take that off of him, it might work out better. And he's got more quality control around him with Anthony Lynn to run the running back game. Kingsbury can control the whole offense, but Anthony Lynn's the guy who's going to be with Chris Rodriguez and Brian Robinson. And these are the running backs that are going to be, the stars on this team, basically. So I don't dislike it. I think Dan Quinn is a good hire. It's a safe hire because it's not flashy. Bieniemy was in the room, but if you didn't like Bieniemy that much, when you saw him as a holdover from the prior regime, I understand that. But, we'll see how this works out because, again, this is I think the steepest hill to climb for Dan Quinn. It's not like he's taking over a Falcons team that had 10 wins the year prior and he got them to the Super Bowl in 2 years. No, this is a Commanders team that is at the bottom of the barrel in a division that is uber competitive and will probably stay that way. So he has to bring them some sort of relevancy. Otherwise, this is going to be a short-term hire for them.
Poor him having to deal with Cliff Kingsbury. I think that's going to be the biggest thing.
Well, yeah.
Look, I'll just say this. I think it's a fine hire, like you said. I think it's a safe hire. But if this team is going to go quarterback, like we believe they will, whether it's if they'll somehow trade up with Chicago, or if it's going to be staying put at number 2 and drafting yet another University of North Carolina quarterback. Ironically, both the top 2 teams, this would be their second crack at a University of North Carolina quarterback, and in theory, it should work out better the second time. Look, a safe hire is totally fine, but if there's one thing I feel like we've seen is that safe hires, when you could potentially bring in the guy you hope to be your franchise quarterback, doesn't necessarily help out that quarterback's development. And even if he's going to be hands-off with the offense, is that really a good thing with Cliff Kingsbury being there? So it's going to be one of those things. And again, if this is a forced offensive coordinator hire, we wait and see. But if he had a hand in this and this dude chose Cliff Kingsbury over Eric Bieniemy, that's a terrible lack of judgment right there. And I hold that against the head coach for that terrible lack of judgment. That's not on the general manager. But again, we won't know that until the stories come out afterwards or the PR campaign that they'll try to put out because it's amazing. The Panthers got some people to believe that Frank Reich was actually down for Bryce Young and not CJ Stroud. It's amazing what PR campaigns can do in this league. So that being said, let's move on to the third head coach on the list. This is not based on anything. This is just the where the list was grabbed from. The Tennessee Titans and Brian Callahan. Now, what did I say when it came to the Titans and who their new head coach was going to be after they got rid of Vrabel? I said how it tends to go. Not every single team, right? Because Ron Rivera to Dan Quinn, there's some similarities between those two and how they are. Differences, but similarities. But what certain teams do is that they're going to go with a coach that was the opposite of the guy that they just fired. So the opposite of Mike Vrabel, Brian Callahan. Now, I'm not saying that to say that Brian Callahan cannot be a good coach in this league. I'm not saying he will be a good coach in this league. But they certainly got Mike Vrabel's opposite in regards to things there in Tennessee. The question is, though, because we just talked about this with Dan Quinn, and now this is going to be the case with Brian Callahan. Your quarterback room right now is Will Levis and Malik Willis. Your running back room, Justin mentioned Derrick Henry before. He's probably gone. So now you're going to have whatever makeshift running backs are there. Your wide receiver is the guy who's supposed to be your number one wide receiver in replace AJ Brown, has not been a number one wide receiver. And well, he's replaced AJ Brown in terms of a body, but not in terms of the production, not in terms of the skill set. So if you're Brian Callahan, who former Bengals offensive coordinator for the context, I don't know if this is going to work out. Just on the surface, I don't know if this is going to work out great. I'm not saying he was necessarily that higher, but I'm saying for an offensive guy coming in who's about to lose the top running back from the year before, where the wide receiver room there, let's be honest, it's lacking. I know DeAndre Hopkins is there, but is he really long for Tennessee? Like, I think there's a lot. We were mentioning for Dan Quinn that there's going to be changes over the next year plus with this roster. I think we're kind of thinking the same thing with Callahan here, are we not? Rick, I'll throw it to you first.
This hire, I think, for me, was one of the two that the more I thought about it, the more I didn't like it. Mm-hmm. Because, like you said, the cupboard is bare in Tennessee. And, like, if this were 2 or 3 years ago, coming off of a Super Bowl run that he had with Burrow and with Zach Taylor and those guys, Brian Callahan would have been the hot name. He would have been the guy that you would have absolutely... I honestly thought when I saw a Bengals coordinator hired, I thought Lou Anarumo was getting the head coaching job instead. Because I think he would make a better head coach, I think, in this league right now than Brian Callahan is. It's uninspiring. It really... There's no, like... What about this screams, we're aside from the fact that he's an offensive-minded head coach, that we're going in a different direction. And you know what the problem is? That for Tennessee, like, this is kind of like what they do. I mean, look, Jeff Fisher, for everything that he was, and we know what he was, in the 90s and 2000s was a very good head coach for the Titans. But since then, who's been there? Wisenhunt, maybe? Munchak?
Yeah, I was going to say Munchak and Malarkey both had brief stints.
So they've gotten out of the Mike hole they were in. Munchak, Malarkey, and Vrabel. Congratulations, you hired a Brian instead of a Mike.
Basically. Was Mitch Kupchak coach for a brief period?
Mitch Kupchak, the Los Angeles Lakers general manager and Brentwood alum?
No. What wasn't there a Kupchak? No, maybe I'm confused.
Munchak, yeah. Yeah. This hire doesn't scream, but Callahan being there doesn't scream like this is immediately going to turn the tide. Because again, not to his discredit, but he's got nobody there. Tannehill's gone. Will Levis could be a good quarterback in this league, but, we're still waiting and hoping to see.
That's a big maybe.
If it's not Derrick Henry there, unless you draft a running back, you've got Ty Spears, who's a good change of pace back out of Tulane, but he's not a number one guy. He's basically the Darren Sproles to LaDainian Tomlinson without LaDainian Tomlinson there, because Hassan Haskins, he ain't LT.
Yeah.
The wide receiver room, DeAndre Hopkins, sure, great, but like you said, how long is he going to be there? Traylon Burks has proven to be a major bust for this team as their prime rookie second-year wide receiver, and their defense, like I don't really know who they've got. I mean, there's nobody really there that I can say, I can rely on Roger McCreary to do something for me. Like, sure, once or twice, but not for a whole season. So it seems like Brian Callahan's going to have a very rough go of it in his first year, which I think is par for the course in Tennessee, to be honest. And I understand the want to say, there's 9 spots here. Maybe this is my chance. But let's be real here. When you hire your dad as an offensive line coach, he was a better head coach than you probably will be. That's the nail in the coffin right there. Sorry to say.
Justin, are you going to complete the trifecta of not liking this hire?
Yeah, probably. I mean, Rick kind of said everything that needs to be said. The fact is, it doesn't move the needle for me. It doesn't. I mean, he was a decent coordinator in Cincinnati, but doesn't Zach Taylor run that offense?
Yep.
He was a decent coordinator in Cincinnati, but it's not super hard when you have 4 Pro Bowlers on your offense. I mean, the only issue on that offense was the offensive line, who generally has their own specific coach. I mean, sure, it's important for the offensive coordinator to be in line with that, but he had Joe Burrow, T. Higgins, Jamar Chase, and Joe Mixon. And that's not even including like all of the young players that they've been bringing up that have been playing decently for them. So like, again, why Callahan?
Yeah.
I
Different.
just there was a lot of
again,
other guys that I think were ahead of him in line.
And to Justin's point too, that's a question for Rand Carthen.
So the only thing that I could think of is that they're gonna say, all right, he helped bring up Joe Burrow, and now we have a young quarterback, and this guy knows how to handle a young quarterback. Is the only thing. But again, isn't that Zach Taylor?
It's like that's a good question because it's one of these things where we always ask with the head coach and offensive coordinator if the head coach is an offensive guy, like who was responsible for things, and like Andy Reid is there. How much did Eric Bieniemy help? Maybe a little bit here, maybe a little bit not. But then we also saw Matt Nagy returning in the offense. It's like, oh, maybe Eric Bieniemy helped out a little bit more than we thought, or Matt Nagy is just that much of a detriment to every single team.
Yes,
probably more the latter.
probably
But
both.
it's one of those things where I'm sure Brian Callahan had something to do with it. We can't say he didn't because why bother having an offensive coordinator if you're the head coach? Like, what is the reason for that if you're just going to do everything? Like, I'm sure he had something to do with it. But I think there's credence to just the points we've all brought up to where he's different from Mike Vrabel. He helped out Joe Burrow. Maybe he can help out Will Levis. That's the only reason. Because aside from that, what else is there? And I'm sure he has resume beforehand, but like his Bengals, his time with the Bengals, like this is what put him on the map. So it's not even necessarily like there's not the biggest track record prior to him, if I'm not mistaken. And if there is, well, he probably would have been a head coach in the conversation sooner. But like you guys said, it was the Super Bowl run that gave him credence. And I think there was fear from the Bengals. It was that offseason or the offseason after that when they lost to the Chiefs in the AFC title game where they were going to lose one of, if not both, their coordinators. And they kept both of them.
Well,
And
here's a few things for me because one, if that was the case, if the intrigue came from the Super Bowl run, why is it happening 2 years after?
Exactly.
And two, this is why the DeAndre Hopkins move was such a head scratcher for me on both sides, on all three fronts, really. One, that there were NFL teams that didn't want to pay him what the Titans were paying him because I don't remember the exact number, but I don't remember it being a ton.
Mm-hmm.
And two, why would DeAndre Hopkins want to go there aside from the money? I mean, he made it clear that he wants to play for a good quarterback and a competitive team. There were teams like the Ravens, for example, were willing to give up a decent money. They paid Odell. I'm sure they would have paid DeAndre. There are teams like the Jets who they paid Lazard. You think that they wouldn't have given that Lazard money to DeAndre Hopkins instead? I mean, and I know that's like a little different, but
yeah.
And then for the Titans, you kind of knew. I mean, you extended your GM and then mysteriously fired him before the end of the season in the same year. You kind of knew things were on their way out with Vrabel. You knew Tannehill really wasn't going to be the guy going forward after this year. You knew that Derrick Henry was probably going to be gone. You drafted young players. You started all your old players, and then you go out and you sign a guy like DeAndre Hopkins to a 2-year deal. And it's just like, where is the leadership going? I mean, so many different mixed signals, and it's hard as an organization to say this is what our goal is when it doesn't seem like you know what your goal is there. What direction are you moving in? What are you trying to do? You can't be an old team and a young team at the same time.
Yeah.
You want to have a young team with veteran leadership? Sure. You want to be an older veteran team who's getting young players to help fill major roles? Sure. You can't be the oldest team in the league and also not start any of your rookies.
Right.
What's the point of having these draft picks?
Yeah.
And again, further down the line too, this is the team that's getting a brand new stadium in 2027. So
that's what they're going for. They'll reset in 2027.
Is this coach going to be there in 2027?
Callahan, absolutely not.
Probably not.
He's not going to be there with this roster as constructed. By the way, Hopkins got 2 years and $26 million, which is less than half of what he got from Arizona 2 years prior.
Well, he was also still getting paid from Arizona last year.
Yeah.
Which is why I think he was willing to take a little bit less. But still, at the very least, like, you're telling me there's another team that wouldn't pay DeAndre Hopkins $13 million last year?
Oh,
There
yeah.
probably was, but he weirdly. Again, at the end of the day, like I think this is the way to summarize the Titans, and we've seen this in sports before, and I'm sure we can say this about other teams in other sports, but focusing just on football. How many teams, if we went back the last decade of the NFL, just the last decade, and we say they held on a year or two too long, and they should have capitalized when everything was good, and they could have torn it down from there. I think that's the case with the Titans. They kept everything together because you mentioned, like, why did they not hire him hypothetically? Like, if they were enamored with him, why did they not hire him after the Bengals Super Bowl run? Well, that was the year the Titans were the number 1 seed and they fell to the Bengals. So to Tennessee, I'm not saying I would have agreed with this, but Tennessee thought, okay, we just got the number 1 seed. We just lost as the number 1 seed, one and done. What if we just keep this roster together, make slight improvements, and we go from there? And in theory, that should work. But you didn't have the quarterback to take you to that next level. You did not have, clearly there were issues defensively. Well, not issues defensively necessarily, but your defense got you 9 sacks in that game, but you still ended up losing. So were there things to clean up on both ends that they just obviously didn't do a good enough job? And like you said, Justin, this was with the previous general manager who you then fired and then bring in the new guy, where with Rand Carth, like I feel like part of this is just him. And if I may mention NHL here real quick, in Pittsburgh with Kyle Dubas, I think he was told going into the season, you get a year with this team to see if it works, and if it's not working, then you can do as you please. I wouldn't necessarily put 2023 on him. I think he was just dealing with the remnants of the previous regime, and now this is his chance to reset things. That being said, as your first head coach for you, and GMs, they sometimes get to, unless the first one's really bad and then they don't get a second. As your first, maybe only head coach hire, there's a lot of questions to be asked about it. So that's going to be the interesting thing to say the very least. So let's move on. That is 3 teams down. Let's go to the 4th one here. Seattle Seahawks, boys. We want to talk about unexpected things that happen. Pete Carroll stepping down was not something we necessarily expected. And as we've obviously heard plenty of rumors since then, a lot of people believe that was an internal things that the Seahawks forced him to step down. So with that being said, new head coach for Seattle, the former Ravens defensive coordinator, Mike Macdonald. If you're going to replace Pete Carroll, replace him with a guy who, as a coordinator, he was pretty good at what he did, and he was pretty good at being the Ravens defensive coordinator. This was a fantastic Ravens team that, defensively, we talked about the amazingness of the linebacking core. We talked about the talent that was in that secondary. This Ravens defense, I think we said this last week, or when we reviewed the Chiefs and Ravens game from weeks back. This Ravens defense played like a team that deserved to get to the Super Bowl. The offense didn't do that in the AFC Championship game. So this is a guy who's coached talented players. He's coached a team that's made it deep into the postseason. He's coached top defenses. So right there, just off the basis, there are positives to have. I don't know if any of us would necessarily call this a bad hire. I think it's fair if you still want to be confused about what happened with Carroll's time there ending so abruptly, because I didn't get any, I don't think any of us had a reading in any way, shape, or form that he was going to be stepping down. But again, it was that maybe more of a forced organizational thing after this past season. But Mike Macdonald being the Ravens DC, I think I hit Rick with Tennessee first last time. So Justin, your thoughts first about the Seahawks and their new man going forward.
Again, I was completely shocked about the Pete Carroll thing. I mean, for a guy that, the question was, hey, was it Pete Carroll or was it Russell Wilson? I think we got the answer with the way that Russell Wilson had played the last 2 seasons in Denver and the way that Seattle bounced back. I mean, it looked like they were going nowhere, but they've drafted well, they've played well, and it's interesting to see now. I mean, I know he's getting older, but why? Why did they make this move now? As opposed to different years. McDonald is a decent hire. I mean, the Ravens have, if anything, over the last 20 years, they've been a defensive powerhouse. And they put out defensive players and they put out defensive coaches. How many of them have been successful as a head coach? Not as many as you would like, but it's an interesting change in pace because they've, for the most part, been an offensive heavy team in my mind. Since the Super Bowls, they've kind of went away from defense. They've relied heavily on trading and signing big name defensive players, which I don't think really has worked out for them in their favor. And then they've really focused on drafting offense. And it's helped. It's helped on their offensive line. It's helped in their running game. It's helped in their receiving core. The one place it hasn't helped is in quarterback, but they've got Geno Smith, who just restructured, and they're doing well with Geno right now. But they needed some help, I think, defensively. And this is a signing that screams that. This is a guy that's going to try and get this defense under control. He's going to get this defense playing strong, hard, smash mouth, Ravens type football. And it's, I think, something that fits them well. I mean, I think that they, in theory, if they can get a couple more young defensive players in there, this is a team that is built better than the Ravens, at least for what they want to do. I mean, they have an offensive line that's played excellent. They have an excellent run game. Especially if they could keep Kenneth Walker and Zach Charbonnet healthy.
They have receivers. Yeah,
they have receivers. That's something the Ravens don't have. The difference here is the Ravens have Lamar Jackson, and the Seahawks have the receivers. That's really what it is. And if they can get that defense humming like they did when they went to those Super Bowls, and they could have those linebackers come back, and they can have the Legion of Boom style defense, and they can get after the quarterback, this is going to be a very good team, especially because their position players are so young.
Yeah. And to your point, Justin, I think that's what this hiring was for. Again, shock Pete Carroll, stepping down / forced by the organization aside, we'll just put that in the rear view. Let's say if he had made the decision himself, like let's live in that world for a second. If he had chosen to retire after this past season and they had to get the guy, I think this is actually a good thing because, like you said, this defense underperformed, I think, in 2023 for what the expectation was. At least
very different coming this year, by the way.
No, yeah, I know. So with that being said, with the way this team underperformed, Tariq Woolen didn't look like the way he did in his Defensive Rookie of the Year, campaign the year before. You had a defense that just didn't generate as much pressure as you would have thought. I think whatever their final sack number was, remember, 9 of those came in that one game against the Giants. You can't be a team that shows up once or twice in terms of breaking apart another team offensive line, and then the other 15 games now in the regular season, you're decent. It needs to be more consistent, that philosophy at least. So maybe this is, like you said, a big defensive addition. And again, I don't know what their cap space is off the top of my head, but if the Seahawks maybe have a little bit of money to play around with here going into this, you have 2 guys on the Ravens front 7 who are free agents in this class, if I'm not mistaken. The main one being Patrick Queen. And if you're the Seahawks, add Patrick Queen to that mix, and that could be someone who plays a massive role for you, and you get that familiarity with McDonald there. I think there's, again, this is all just grading off of potential. I think this is a pretty good hire for the most part. Like if you had to try to separate like the hirings for this team, for these 8 teams, and we were to give either grades, or if you have to say you have to pick these that were good, these that were bad in the middle, I think this leans a lot more towards a higher grade and a good hire compared to, the last 2, at least from my personal perspective. Well, at least especially for all of us on the Titans head coaching hire. But that's what I think. I think there's things that if they break right, can make a lot of sense for this hire occurring. Rick, your thoughts on McDonald before we move on?
So the cap goes up to $13 million for the Seahawks now with the new salary cap in place. After Geno restructured, they were actually at $400,000 under the cap until the new salary cap, so they're probably going to benefit from it. This is another one for me that I'm kind of like, but to be fair, I think he was, if not the last coach, maybe one of the last 2 coaches hired in this cycle. So it kind of, Seahawks kind of had the last of the picks. So I guess that's what they went with. And McDonald's shown that he's been a good defensive coordinator. My concern with this is more so about things that you can't project and protect from, because what's been the hallmark of the Ravens defense for the last 2 seasons under Mike McDonald? And again, not his fault, but what's been the hallmark? Secondary injuries. Jalen Armour-Davis hasn't had a whole healthy season in 2 years. Marlon Humphrey was out a lot last year. They had a couple other bigger injuries this year. Kyle Fuller was out in 23. So guys like Witherspoon and Woolen and Kobe Bryant, Quandre Diggs, they if for some reason something happens where the injury bug bites, then you're going to look at McDonald and say, what are you doing on defense that is causing you guys in games to have these catastrophic injuries that are going to waste the season? This defense, this secondary could be Legion of Boom 2.0. They're that young, they're that talented, and once they get rid of Jamal Adams, they'll have no issues. But at the moment, they have an issue with Jamal Adams. But yeah, it's interesting to me that like you bring in a guy who's a defensive mind. The offense seems pretty stout and pretty standard, so you don't have to do too much there. But this is actually a very interesting situation for them because they basically hired, I want to say, looking at everybody, they basically hired in college coaches to come in and run this team. Because McDonald, prior to the Baltimore, he was a Michigan guy, so he was with Harbaugh. And then their offensive coordinator is Ryan Grubb, who was at Washington, went to Alabama for like 2 minutes and then said, no, I want to go to the NFL. So went to the Seahawks. So let's see if it's more of a college-style offense for them to coincide with this defense. It's wait and see because, again, you're in a division with the defending NFC champions, a Rams team that we'll see what they do, and a Cardinals team that was young last year that's a year older, and maybe they're going a year better. So it's an interesting hire. I think that, again, I would think we were all shocked by Pete Carroll leaving, but at the time when this hire was made, there was really no other option for them to go for somebody. So I think they did the best of what they could, and let's see what McDonald does. He's probably the youngest head coach in the NFL right now. So let's see if the spotlight's big enough for him or not.
There we are. I think Rick,
I was going to let you go.
Yeah, thanks. I think Rick rigged the broadcast there to keep me mute there. But ultimately, I think it could work out. You never know because if we're being honest with the Ravens, I mean, you mentioned McDonald hiring college coordinators here. That's kind of what the Ravens have done the last couple of years to replace their guys, right? Is McDonald coming in from Michigan, and then also this was the first season with Todd Monken, who came from college. I don't know if he had any NFL experience before his time in Georgia, but coming in, so that worked in Baltimore. Like a lot of these guys, if there's one thing to learn, these guys will go with what they know and go with what they've seen work. If he is going to believe that, bringing in a couple guys that he can trust to make things work, kind of what was a similar thing with Baltimore. They brought in a couple college coordinators that I'm sure John Harbaugh had to have had plenty of conversations with prior to hiring them. Maybe he thinks it could work. Maybe it'll work for Seattle as well. And again, 13 million of cap space, you say as of now. I have to imagine they're going to find a way to clear up a little bit more, maybe get closer to 2022 before free agency really hits. Seattle's probably going to be doing something. And like Justin said, they've been drafting really well the last few seasons, not even just in the higher rounds. Again, Tariq Woolen was the 4th, 5th round pick.
Yeah.
So this is a team that could definitely figure it out.
And one other thing too that I just went through their season, seeing like who they have. It's smart to hire a guy who was a defensive coordinator in the AFC when you're hosting Buffalo and Miami in this upcoming season.
Yeah, you're going to need it. Yeah. You're definitely going to need it to say the very least. All right, we are halfway through. Let's get to this one. These next two, well, one of these two guys we definitely talked a lot about on the show. The other one we may have touched the topic, but didn't really get too much into detail of it. But the New England Patriots with Gerard Mayo. I'll keep it simple. I'm not really surprised that the Patriots went with an internal hire. I don't think most of us are. I think it was a given that they were just going to keep a guy internally. And then we learned after the fact that Mayo did have the clause in his contract. So clearly multiple people, not even just Belichick at the time, multiple people believe that, Gerard Mayo has the makings of a head coach here. Linebackers have had a little bit of success here recently. The former linebackers becoming head coaches, right? So maybe this could work, to say the very least. I think this is a solid hire. I think this is a Patriots team that needs to get back into a rhythm of things, like just be respectable in games. They need a new quarterback at some point. May not come in this draft class, or maybe it will. They have a high enough pick. Maybe it will come in this draft class. Maybe it won't. But you at least need to get better skill position talent in there. You need to, keep that defense rock steady as it has been for a while now. Even the last couple of years when they haven't been great, the defense, at least every once in a while, is what lets them stay in games. Gerard Mayo, of course, with his experience with both as a player and then the last couple of years as an assistant. I think it's a fine hire. It's not something like I'm not praising it because this will be the best hire of this class. I mean, for all we know, maybe it somehow will be. But this is not the best hire. This is not the worst hire. Like, this is kind of a middle one. And I'm not saying middle as in meh. I'm saying middle as in the Patriots didn't overwhelm or underwhelm with the hire. I think we were all whelmed with the fact that they just went with an internal person to ultimately overtake Belichick. So there's that. If potentially, if anyone out there thinks that this is underwhelming because now it's up to him to take over what was the best head coaching job of the last 2 decades, that's a fair point. I can see it, but I don't necessarily know if that'll be the case. Who did I go to first on the last head coach?
Justin, you did.
So your turn, Rick, first with Gerard Mayo.
This is just quick. Mind-blowing fact 2.0 for this show.
Oh.
The Patriots have the 3rd overall pick in this year's draft, which is the first time they've picked in the top 10 of a draft since 2008 when they picked Gerard Mayo.
Look at that.
But again, like, you want to reset? Here you go. You've never had a top 10 pick in almost 15 years. Reset. You need it. They haven't hired a GM yet. I don't know what their plan is, but they need to do something there, right? Because
soon, you would think soon.
You think, right? Because look, I'll say something nice about this. Like, yes, you want the Patriots to get back to respectability. 5 wins, is respectable for Justin. Maybe 6, but lower than the Jets. But 3, okay, 3 wins. But it's interesting because you're right. They have the 3rd overall pick. Do they go for a quarterback? Or if they don't like the top 2 guys, do they maybe trade down and try and get more assets with a team that wants a quarterback like a Jalen Daniels, who will probably be a number 3 overall potential? Or do they do the thing that we all are going to be scared of them doing? And do they bring in the kid of one of their greatest rivals at number 3? Do they sign and draft Marvin Harrison Jr., which would just be an absolute nightmare for all of us? But listen, it's a new regime. It's a new Patriots. Let's see what happens. Let's see what happens with the BS Patriots. See what they do.
The BS Patriots. I mean, they need to settle the GM spot right now. Like, I don't understand what's taking them so long. Yeah. Justin, your thoughts about the Patriots? I'm sure you want Gerard Mayo to go 0-17 this season and be the first ever 0-17. But that aside,
of course. But the question is, if you thought Belichick went stale so badly that you kind of forced him out, why is Gerard Mayo the answer? And I get that that they believe in him and it's a younger guy and he'll bring in some new philosophies and things like that. But he's been a Belichick guy his whole career, from a player to a coach to now the head coach. I don't understand how this is going to be that much different. And I guess maybe they don't want it to be that different. Because if they can just tweak Belichick's old school style and make it a new school style, but still have that Belichick way, then they should be successful in a league like this. But I don't see. I mean, usually you have a team that when you have a coach that's been there for 10 years and you want to change things up, you go the complete opposite. And this is not that. This is so similar. It's like dating someone that looks exactly like your ex. Like, did you really want things to change, or are you kind of just hoping that a soft reset will kind of jumpstart things in your favor? And I hope the answer is no. I hope they're terrible forever.
Well, we know that. It'll be interesting to say the very least in what they do. I think this is going to be a team that, especially when it comes to the 3 of us personally, when we get the mock draft going here again, who will have that mock draft selection is going to be the answer.
It'll be great.
We almost do. We need to
draft hunters for them, just like 3 rounds in a row.
Yikes!
We won't let you do that, but
No, I wouldn't do that. I wouldn't. I could be unbiased sometimes.
Well, not even for them. Just the sanctity of our draft. Just the sanctity of our draft to make us look halfway decent, like we know what we're talking about. Then again, I think that credibility was shot a long time ago. Anyways, moving on. This will be a little bit quicker. We definitely talked about this guy, so I don't know how much more we need to deliberate about him. But Jim Harbaugh is the Los Angeles Chargers head coach. Very briefly to summarize it and what we all said, it just made sense, really, at the end of the day. Los Angeles, it's Herbert. There's skill position talent there. Now, they were one of the teams in the negative cap. They still need to figure out things with cap space, and I don't think they're fully done figuring out between whether it's restructurings or even if they got to let a guy or 2 go coming up here. So there's still plenty to figure out with this roster. They did hire a GM, though, if I'm not mistaken. They do have their new man there. So between their new general manager and Jim Harbaugh being the head coach, they'll figure things out. I think the thing to summarize it for all 3 of us, and you 2 can go very quickly after this, is just it made sense, right? Harbaugh just won the national championship in college. Big personality, hot name in coaching for the last couple of years. He was going to go to LA. I don't think any of us were surprised by that. So those are my thoughts. Justin, yours real quick.
So if you look at Harbaugh's career, I mean, the issue, at least in his head coaching career, was who's the quarterback? I mean, I know Colin Kaepernick was his guy, but even at the end, like, they didn't really have a ton of quarterback play. So it's going to be interesting to see what he can do with Justin Herbert. They're going to need to get a running game in there. It's something that Harbaugh relies on heavily. There's rumors about him going after Blake Corum in the draft. There's rumors about him going after Saquon Barkley in free agency, but that's something we'll touch upon more later. They're definitely going to have to make moves on that defense. They cannot pay all of those guys all of that money and have the production that they had last year. So I do expect them to make some moves there. And I expect there to be some new names there. Maybe a guy like Joey Bosa is no longer a Charger. Maybe he starts his career somewhere else. Maybe a guy like Khalil Mack, who was arguably the best player on that defense last year, but they're going to need to make a change from at some point. And he's owed a lot of money. Derwin James is owed a lot of money. There's going to be guys that are going to move there. So it's going to be interesting to see how the GM fits in the beginning. And what direction they go in terms of players and personnel, and then we'll see him coach on the field. Because let's face it, I mean, he's had success everywhere he's gone. I mean, it's easier when you know other teams' plays, but we'll see. We'll see what's going on.
Rick?
Yeah, I was surprised Connor Stallions didn't get a coaching position on the Chargers
yet.
Yeah, that's true.
There is one other thing that I will say before I make my pedantic Harbaugh joke, and that is that I did like one hire they made on the coaching, and that's Sanjay Lal, who was the new wide receiver coach, because he's been a wide receiver coach in like 7 different other spots, and last year he was on the Seahawks. Because let's be real here, Quentin Johnson was very disappointing last year, but bringing in a veteran wide receiver coach who can kind of work with him to get him off of like whatever schneid he was on might help him become the receiver that we all thought he was going to be when he was drafted by the Chargers to go for there. Now, that being said, it's really ironic to me that the guy who looks most like the kid brother that you beat up and when you're older is the head coach of the kid brother of the LA NFL franchises. It just fits. It flows perfectly. Because that's what it is. Yeah, it was the right hire. They needed to go splashy. They needed to make some kind of noise. And you pair Harbaugh with Herbert and all the weapons they have in that receiver room. But Justin's right. They got to get a running game in this industry because, honestly, if they don't have one, it's rough because this is a tough division for them. But we'll see. I mean, we'll see if Harbaugh can conjure up that magic again because, remember, it did take him a little bit of time both at Michigan and San Francisco to come into his fore. Like, you know, when he was on the Niners, yeah, he had the 13-3 for a season, but like, you know, they didn't get over that hump. They never got over that hump once. And then the last year he was 8-8, he pieced out and went to Michigan. And, you know, you can say, yeah, he had success wherever he went, but what is his success? Now that he knows what a national championship is, what it tastes like, does he expect that to happen year one with the Chargers? Because if that's the case, Patrick Mahomes has something to say to you, and it's nothing.
I think it'll be a lot of retooling on the fly, and I think it's going to be them figuring out the outlook of this roster going forward, to say the very least. Because like Justin has alluded to, it wouldn't surprise me if a couple of big defensive names are just going to go because you've had these big defensive names for a couple of years, and what has that shown? And maybe you just need a couple new faces, you know, free up that cap space, get to focus on that in this draft, and really, like, yes, this is technically their first draft, but they're only getting, 2 months to prepare for it. I think 2025 will be the first real draft for Harbaugh and the Chargers GM. And then that's when they're really going to make more of an impact. And I think that's more so where they're going to get a lot more of their people. And then ultimately, this is going to be a very different team. Forget 2024. 2025 Chargers is going to be a lot of different faces on this squad, to say the very least.
And that GM, by the way, is Joe Ortiz, who was the Ravens player personnel director. So never held a position as high as this one. So this will be fun for him too.
Indeed, to say the very least. All right, last 2 teams here, and it is the NFC South in these cases. So we'll just pair these 2 together because there's one that I think the 3 of us have a lot more faith in, and then there's one where the 3 of us are like, okay. The Carolina Panthers hired Dave Canales Tampa Bay Buccaneers guy from this past season did help Baker get this really good year, so clearly knows something. But obviously unproven. Atlanta Falcons go Ricky Morris here. Former head coach in this league, of course. He was in Tampa Bay for a bit. Was an interim head coach for Atlanta, actually. I believe the season they fired Dan Quinn, if I'm not mistaken, he took over. So, everything ties together, ultimately, ladies and gentlemen, even with the head coach discussions we have. So a couple new faces in the NFC South for two teams where one of them were so bad last year, and the other one were very close to getting the division, if we're being honest, but they didn't have a quarterback or a head coach or a competent offensive play calling scheme or anything of the like. So we'll see in that regard. The Carolina Panthers, I just find it funny that we've mentioned GMs here and there. Carolina was like, what did Tepper say before he hired these guys? Like, he wants guys that he'll be able to work with for 15, 20, 30 years or something like that. Well, their general manager has already been there since 2021, so you're already 3 years down in that because they decided to make their assistant general manager their new general manager. And look, I know maybe it wasn't the most desirable situation because, let's be honest here, the previous regime / the current owner have not left them in the best of shapes going into 2024. But to go with the guy that was there alongside the guy that made decisions you didn't like? Really? And with Dave Canales, maybe this works out. Maybe he's able to help Bryce Young. Maybe yes, maybe no. Like, we don't know. He's never been a head coach. He's been an offensive coordinator for 1 year. There's not a lot of track record to go by. So you're kind of hoping that it's been 50-50 over the last 8 years on hiring these guys who this is their first legitimate type, right? Are you going to get the success? I'm not saying they'll make a Super Bowl, but is he going to lean more towards the Sean McVay aspect of things where, you'll 2-3 years from now, you're challenging for 10, 11 win seasons, getting the NFC South? Is it maybe in the middle of Zach Taylor to where there's been some success there? We've questioned it in the past, especially Rick, of how much of that success has been tied to Joe Burrow. And is Zach Taylor really that much of a coach? Or is it just going to be the completely opposite way where we're expecting Brian Callahan to go here potentially? So it's one of three ways, really. Really good, really bad, or mid. I don't know. I don't really want to say. This is a tough one for me. I would kind of say for Canales, if I had to grade him, it's kind of like a C plus B minus type deal where maybe it could work out, which is why you give it the B minus potential. But it's middle of the road because first time. This is going to be the dude's first opportunity, his first coaching staff he has to hire. So you're really going to see. I don't know. It's going to be a really complicated thing to say the least. But and then Ricky Morris, steady veteran hand. He's worked. It's funny. He's worked both offensive and defenses because after, I believe was it after his Tampa Bay time or after his brief stint with the Falcons before, to where he was for a very brief period, an offensive, like he went to the offensive side of things before he returned to the defensive side of things to be a defensive coordinator again, right? So you have a guy like that who has kind of done it on both ends, but especially the defenses, but he kind of he's seen good offenses. So he'll probably, let his guys handle that and is going to put the trust in them. This is a team that they have the skill position talent. They have Bijan Robinson. They have Drake London. They could figure out what to do with Kyle Pitts and not make him the dang decoy on offense. Maybe Kyle Pitts could look closer to what he was as a rookie. Like, there's weapons here. They just need the quarterback, I think. So that's my thoughts on both these teams. We'll split it. Justin, Justin go first on this one for the two head coaches, because Rick should talk about the Falcons last, considering how high he was on them going into the season. So, Justin, your thoughts about the duo of NFC South head coaching hires?
It's also fair because you guys were so high on the Panthers going into the season too, and look how that turned out.
Oh my God, I believed in that coaching too, but look, there's a lot of issues. I think that they need a lot of talent in certain areas that I don't think that they got last year. I mean, the offensive line took a step back when you have a rookie quarterback. Things like that happen. The running game took a major step back. That affects the offensive line as well. They didn't have a ton of receiving help. Adam Thielen was the best one they had. And really, it was a bunch of dump offs to him, and he caught 1 million balls a game, and maybe he had 150 yards a bunch of times, but it didn't translate. They didn't score. They weren't winning. He didn't play every game. He was injured. He's an older guy. And I didn't love the way they went about coaching Bryce Young. The guy that they brought in is going to be the offensive coordinator, so to speak. He's going to really sit down and develop Bryce Young. And the reason they brought him in is because of what he's done the last 2 years. And that's 2 years ago, he made Geno Smith Comeback Player of the Year. And last year, he made Baker Mayfield Comeback Player of the Year candidate, and who I probably think should have won that award. He's going to he's going to do his best to turn Bryce Young into a guy that can, at the very least, manage a game. And that's what they need as a first and foremost thing. They need him to take that Trevor Lawrence jump, where Trevor Lawrence didn't have a great first season, but we saw what it was. We didn't see that from Bryce Young. He had a decent first season. The stats are comparable, but we never saw that breakout game. We never saw that game or that play or that stretch where Bryce Young was like, all right, this guy will probably be all right. It's something that they're going to have to do their best to get out of him. And if we don't see that, we might see a situation where we get a Josh Rosen thing where he's on this team for not 1 year, maybe 2 years, and Bryce Young is gone. And I don't think that they're necessarily going to get rid of the head coach after 1 year. So, although you never know nowadays, but I
with that owner, you never know.
But we've seen it a lot. We've seen a 1 year head coaching stint every year for the past 5 years.
The Texans contributed to a couple of them.
The Texans did it. The Jaguars did it. The Panthers did it. So it's going to be interesting to see. They're going to have to bring in a lot of talent. They're going to have a lot of cap space. They're going to be a very different team next year. That defense is not going to be the same. Burns is probably going to be gone. And it's going to be interesting to see who they bring in, both as a player, but also as a supplemental coach, because this is a guy that doesn't have a ton of coaching experience on his resume. They might want to bring in some veteran guys to be a defensive coordinator, an offensive coordinator, position coaches, etc. Rick is already saying he didn't like this.
Well, but before he goes, your thoughts on Falcons?
I'm not saying that they're definitely going to be successful. I'm just telling you where they think they're going. And in terms of the Falcons, I mean, it seems like the right coaching move for them. I mean, I don't really know a ton about his coaching experience. I know that he was pretty decent for them as their interim head coach, and maybe it's a hire that they probably should have done back when he was there. But again, this is a team that has underperformed for a while now. And what can Raheem Morris get out of some of these big name players that his predecessors could not? Obviously, I think you're going to have a new quarterback next year because the quarterback situation was a mess last year. But there's going to be some changes. And I don't necessarily think this year is going to be a good indication of whether or not Raheem Morris is a good coach, because there's going to be a lot of turmoil there. And he's going to have to clean up a lot of what was built up beforehand. You might not have a guy like Kyle Pitts on that team anymore. He's been underutilized for years. He's going into this is his fourth season now in the NFL?
I believe so, yeah.
Which means they're going to have to decide on his fifth-year option. And then if they don't think he's going to re-sign, are you going to franchise tag a tight end? Are you going to trade him? What's going to happen? Drake London is a guy, another one. You're going to have to make a decision. You have a wealth of running backs there. Is Cordero Patterson your long-term solution? Probably not. Is he going to be out of there? What are you going to do with this roster under its current construction? Because I don't think this is the team that you are going to stake your claim to, especially because a lot of these guys aren't his guys.
There's that. Then it'll be interesting to say at the very least. I'll just say I already spoke my piece. I think with Morris, I think you get the quarterback in there. I think that'll be a big thing for him, is the number one for Atlanta. And for Carolina, again, I'm 50-50 with the head coach hiring itself. I'm just more concerned with the general manager hiring, because assistant GMs play a little bit more of a role than what I think we really understand behind the scenes in terms of getting stuff on the ground, in terms of getting connections with agents, in terms of getting conversations beginning with trades. If you didn't like what the general manager in Carolina did, if you're Dave Tepper the last couple of seasons, why are you hiring the guy that probably played a role in helping some of this stuff happen? I don't get it. That's the number one thing for me. So I will say this, and I think I could confirm this, even though I'm speaking for another person here as well. I think I can confirm this. Me and Justin will not be picking the Panthers to win the NFC South for 2024. I'll just say that right now. I don't
No,
think
probably not.
Oh,
Well, look,
thank
I
God.
was right on my prediction, and the prediction was that one of these teams is going to be a huge surprise. I just picked the wrong one.
Yeah.
The answer was the Bucks. I had the Bucks being last and the Panthers being first.
Well, also to be fair,
you picked the right one, but you picked them with the wrong record. Because the Panthers were a huge surprise and they went terrible and fired Frank Reich.
You know, Justin, I'm pretty sure if both of us flip our NFC South from last year, we're on the money, basically.
Yeah. Let me start with Raheem Morris, because in thinking about this more, I can say a little bit more about Carolina than I can about Atlanta. Raheem Morris is my guy. A Hofstra football alum and a guy who, did something very interesting in his time in Atlanta, in that when he went back to work with Dan Quinn, he started off as the defensive backs coach, and then the next year became the wide receivers coach. So, like Jerk's point, what you mentioned, which lends a certain credibility and versatility to the fact that this is a guy who just lives and breathes football. You're right. Atlanta needs a new quarterback, but they need to also make sure they have the same guys that they had last year, because a lot of their wide receivers are UFAs. Mac Hollins, Van Jefferson, Scotty Miller, Patterson's an unrestricted free agent. They have a lot of questions they have to answer for this team. They've got a two-headed monster if they can use them properly in Algier and Bijan Robinson at the running back room. That is a nightmarish running back room if they can use it properly. But again, they need a good quarterback. They need to short the wide receivers. And they need to just play good, solid football. I believe they have a good enough team to make that happen. It's this offseason that's pivotal. But Raheem Morris, I think, is the guy for this job, and I'm excited to see what he can do. Now, on to the Carolina Panthers. I have a heavy-handed analogy here, but I think Jerg will appreciate this. Dave Tepper, to me, is like the military general that gets installed after a coup in a country and has no idea how to lead, but thinks that he can. And let me explain to you why. It's not just Dan Morgan, who goes from GM to regular GM. They kept Ejiro Evero as the D coordinator. So Dave Canales might not have been, if you were just seeing that Evero was there, if you were going to keep Evero, make him the head coach, because you kept him. And to your point, Justin, about offensive coordinators, they seem to want to do something that's like, Seattle Junior, because their offensive coordinator is Bradley Idzik, John Idzik's son, the former Jets GM. And, it gets better. The passing game coordinator, the guy who's supposed to really help Bryce Young figure it all out, is Pete Carroll's son. Nate Carroll is the passing game coordinator in this offense. Does Dave Tepper know how to run on shoes?
Nepotism, baby.
Or run like a soda shop? Like, was his job in elementary school a bookstore that he embezzled all the funds out of? Like, what is he doing? Carolina, they do not have their first pick this year, which was the number one overall pick, mind you, thanks Tepper. So their top pick is the 33rd pick. By that time, it's all gone. You have no first round options. You're not even going to be there on draft night in the first night. So what are you doing? And again, this is a guy in Dave Tepper who looked at his division and said, Tampa Bay was good this year. Who's their offensive coordinator? Let's hire him. Make him the head coach. I have a very, very strong suspicion Dave Canales is a one and done. Not even a one and done. He's not making it out of his first season, because I don't think you're solving Bryce Young's issues in this season with this staff. You don't have the weapons. Like Justin said, the running back room took a massive step back. You have no true clear number one wide receiver. Your DJ Moore trade was laughable because Adam Thielen, could have broken Michael Thomas's passing receptions in a season, but it would have been 150 catches for 151 yards. That's what it could have been. That's your offense? Really? The defense is the defense, whatever. But again, if Avero's still there, if your guys are still there from the old regime, why not just promote them?
And you're probably going to lose one of those guys because Brian Burns, and this is where my issue with Morgan is. I'm sure Morgan was probably one of the people that wanted to keep Burns the last 2 trade deadlines where there were rumors that teams were willing to offer 2 firsts or a first and a second. Now you might lose him for nothing.
Yeah. And Dan Morgan was a Panther, a lifer, so I get the kind of, we want to keep our guy, that sort of thing. Fine, whatever, but like it's just a bad situation, man. This is gross flagrant mismanagement to an umpteenth degree that we haven't seen since Enron, man. It's just ridiculous. It is. And I hope for the best for Canales. I wish you well, but you got an Alabama quarterback as your starting quarterback, and you know how that works out. So you got no running room, you got no wide receiver room, you got no help, and you got a defensive coordinator who's probably pissed off that he didn't get the head coaching job, which he should have gotten, because let's be real here, he was a hot commodity name when he was the Denver DC.
Yep.
And now he's just saddled in Charlotte.
Yep.
I'm sure it's lovely this time of year, but it's Charlotte, He could have been hired in Seattle, but no. He's the Panthers D coordinator without Brian Burns and with a one-legged J.C. Horn. Like, come on.
It's not looking great, to say the very least. We need to figure out if David Tepper has a couple skeletons in the closet to get him out here real quick, because this is not great. I'm just saying.
David Tepper, codename Donald Sterling.
So if your people going to Panthers, if your opposing fans going to Panthers games, just be careful. You might need to bring an umbrella if David Tepper is going to throw any drinks or fries at you or something like that. So just get ready for that. So that being said, Rick, that was absolutely outstanding for us to end our full analysis on the head coaches going to 2024. Some we liked, some we have faith in, some wait and see, and some no, to say the very least. For the most part, we were aligned on most of them. I think like Dan Quinn was like one of the big separators for us, and Mike McDonald as well. So ironically, two of the guys going to the NFC. All right, Rick, that was a perfect warm-up, I think, for you, because it's time to end things off with the good old-fashioned Rantin' Rick's Rostrum Podium. Rick, take us home.
I'm reaching here, man. I'm really reaching on these topics here.
You're looking forward to the break, so you can get a little bit more.
So here are a couple of things that I don't understand that I want to address right now, and this will make up my podium for this week. Number 3, hot yoga. Like, I'm already going to sweat doing yoga as it is because, I'm not a very flexible human being. Therefore, these positions that you have me in are turning me into a corkscrew. Why do I have to be sweating in 95 million degree heat doing this? Like, I'm comfortable in my shirt, thank you very much. Like, why do I have to, have it torn off me like I'm doing yoga about 5 minutes from the coronavirus in the sun? Like, come on now. That's ridiculous. Why? Why do we do this thing? Number 2, why are cruise ships a thing? Like, if I wanted to sail on a boat with like half the population of Birmingham, Alabama, this sounds like a great way to do it, a cruise ship. And they're just getting larger. Like, there's going to be a cruise ship that we're going to invent and going to create that's literally going to span from one coast to another coast. And so instead of sailing from New York to London, you can just walk from New York to London. It'll be taking 35 days, but you'll get there. You'll be in London before you know it, instead of being on a ship. Like, oh, and these names too. The icon of the seas, the freedom of the seas. How about the get off of my seas? Ridiculousness. And now, my number 1 on this whole thing. Why are tortoises allowed to live so long? Like there's a story about a tortoise named Jonathan, who's 191 years old. Like, what? Like, what is this tortoise going to do? This tortoise is going to live, past 5 generations of a family and have no home to child on its back. It'll be growing slow. Like, what? Why? Like, okay. And here's what I'll say about this. Why are tortoises allowed to live 190 plus years when dogs have such a short life and are infinitely better than tortoises? Better than humans, especially David Tepper. But why are we allowing this to happen? Why? So, while that is all going on, I do have one last thing for you guys. If you see me in a parking lot and I'm pulling out of a spot, just let me pull out of the spot first. Don't try and swerve around me, because I will find your car and I will key it. Because parking lot etiquette, you don't know what you're doing. Thank you.
And that's not a threat. That is a promise from the Podfather himself. So
spoiler.
the Podfather's promise. That being said, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us on yet another edition of the Sports Agents of Chaos podcast. The long-awaited coaching thoughts of the 2024 new crop have finally been delivered, and that's what it is. On the next episode of the show, we're going to be each of us giving a little bit of thoughts on what we're looking forward to for this early part of the offseason coming up before we are likely to take our break, all things considered. So it'll be a fun way for us to end off truly this is the second season of the Sports Agents of Chaos podcast when you consider it. So the second season of #SAOC podcast is coming to the end. And don't worry, we'll be back better than ever in season 3 with mock draft number 3 and more. From us to all of you, thank you so much for joining us on yet another edition of the show. You can find us on YouTube at Sports Agents of Chaos. And of course, join us back next time for more fun, football, and chaos. Take care, everyone.